Hello, darlings. Some of you remember me from last year. I was the really bodacious woman that got up on this stage and made a scene. A lot of you stood up. It was great. We had fun. You are my tribe. This is my vibe. I am right where I belong, right where I am supposed to be. And I love you all. I'm thrilled to be here. Anybody that doesn't know me, I am Andrea Perrin. I am the eldest daughter of the Perrin family that was profiled in the film The Conjuring, Paranormal Witness last week or the week before, et cetera, but I actually wrote the whole true story of my family's ordeal in a haunted farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island in the 70s, in a trilogy of books called House of Darkness, House of Light. And I just, a couple of weeks ago, released, anybody that's into the CERN Hadron Collider, read In a Flicker. We just released that a couple of weeks ago as well. So I'm a writer predominantly, but I lecture all around the country, make a lot of videos, make a lot of noise. I'm here to represent the sisterhood. So thank you all for being here, and I have the distinct honor and privilege of introducing someone to you that will rock your world and expand your consciousness. Dr. Rebecca Hardcastle Wright founded the Institute of Exoconsciousness. She is a featured keynote speaker and is a frequent guest on radio talk shows. She is also the author of Exoconsciousness, Your 21st Century Mind. Rebecca has extensive experience working with UFO and extraterrestrial experiencers, practicing as a healer, coach, and hypnotherapist. She has trained with Ruth Hover, PhD, who was affiliated with Harvard's John Mack, MD, and his program for extraordinary experience research known as PEER. Rebecca received her bachelor's degree in philosophy and religion from Otterbein University. She studied continental philosophy at Karl Jasper's concentration and teaches exoconsciousness at International Metaphysical University, the Institute for European Studies in Basel, Switzerland. That's the Karl Jasper's concentration. And she received a Master of Divinity in Philosophical Theology at Boston University of Theology. Rebecca received her doctorate in parapsychic science from American Institute of Holistic Theology. She earned her hypnotherapy and life coaching certification from Southwest Institute of Healing Arts. Please, with me, welcome from Washington, D.C., my distinct honor and privilege, Rebecca Hardcastle Wright, PhD.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you, Paolo, and thank you, Andrea and Bob. And I'm so glad that during the introduction, it was mentioned the fact that I studied under Ruth Hover, because Ruth never missed a Laughlin conference. And even when I couldn't go because I was a single mom, she would come home with notebooks full of notes, arms full of books, and a head full of stories to tell me. And I would spend afternoon after afternoon at her home. Ruth is no longer with us in physical body, but she, I'm sure, is in this room having the time of her life, and she may be downstairs playing the slot machine also. So it's great to be with you today, to learn and to collaborate and to hear all of these wonderful ideas that are moving around this world with an energy of their own. What I want to accomplish today in this talk is to examine exoconsciousness in a broad spectrum of politics, culture, religion, and history. To do that, I want to navigate three maps with you. I'm going to navigate the map of Washington, D.C., the map of ufology, and view what they have to offer us as ET experiencers. And then finally, we're going to navigate the map of exoconsciousness. And I'm going to talk about what I term exoconsciousness, the perfect storm, and also what I term the exoconscious human. Who are we as ET experiencers? By ET experiencers, I'm talking in very broad strokes. You may be an ET experiencer who actually had contact with an ET, or you may have had an intelligent orb encounter or seen a UFO, or maybe you read Barbara Lamb's book, or maybe you went to her Contact E session, or maybe you saw Jennifer Stein's documentaries, and something within you moved when you saw and heard and felt those words. Who are we as ET experiencers? Actually, we're a very quiet group of people. We are quiet individuals as well as small communities. We meet in libraries, restaurants, private homes, or sometimes we gather on social media sites, or sometimes we just keep to ourselves. And there are many of us who just keep to ourselves. And we literally live quietly in two worlds, 1 foot in the extraterrestrial world and 1 foot in the world of Earth. A decade ago, I created the concept of exoconsciousness. During that time, I defined exoconsciousness as the extraterrestrial origins, dimensions, and abilities of human consciousness. When I founded the Institute for Exoconsciousness, I began to broaden that definition, to pull it out so that it was more inclusive. Today, I say that all humans are exoconscious, that all humans have an innate ability to connect and to communicate with extraterrestrials. Not some humans, not some special people, but all humans. The Exoconscious Institute, as so many people have been talking about today, believes that we are all part of this cosmic creation. And as such, I believe that we are all, in some respect, ETs. As I live my life as what I call an exoconscious human, I have come to perceive myself through a different lens, a different frame of reference. I continually ask myself, what am I perceiving and experiencing? Where am I in all of this? And how am I participating? My self-identity is evolving as I grow exoconscious. I am exoconscious. I am conscious of my ET self-identity. When we have ET contact, something happens deep inside of the core of who we are, and literally our identity changes. I'm learning as an exoconscious human to know myself, to expand my vision, to open my mouth, to speak, to share. If I see a pattern, I say it. If I have an ET experience, I share it. And sometimes that was really difficult for me because as a small child, actually clear through college, I stuttered whenever I spoke. But I needed to get a hold of myself, manage who I was, and learn how to stand up and speak when I saw something. I confess that over the years of developing exoconsciousness, that exopolitics and ufology have been challenging for me. I didn't relate to how ufology and exopolitics define me. I questioned what was happening. I questioned how and where I fit in ufology and exopolitics. I felt like the frog and not the prince. I felt sometimes like, as an ET experiencer, I was pushed to the perimeters. I read ufology, exopolitics, and I said, where are the experiencers in all of this? Where am I? In the past, we ET experiencers were asked to wait patiently for disclosure. We were asked to stand aside so as not to interfere with the conversations of the esteemed professors and scientists and politicians. as they communicated with one another about ET, because some of them might view us as crazy. Please, no ET experiencers croaking at the press conference. So today, I want to structure my talk around 3 maps: the map of Washington, D.C., the map of ufology, and the map of exoconsciousness. So we're going to take a hike. Everybody likes to take a hike. Actually, we're going to take 3 hikes. We're going to use a map of images, and we're going to use consciousness as our compass. But before we take off, here is my bottom line. I have a huge family. I have 8 kids and 17 grandkids. And I care about my marriage, I care about my family, I care about my friends, and I care about my community. And I care about everyone in this room. I care about ET experiencers. I also care about all of the energetic activists who are working for us every day, because we are all in this together. Everybody has a different perspective. Everybody has a different passion. Everybody has a different assignment, quite frankly, when we all come into this business of being ET experiencers. So I want to clarify today and tell you, this is what I see today. Tomorrow, I may see something totally different, but today, this is what I see. The last time I spoke at Laughlin was in 2009, and in those 6 years, a lot happened to me. I worked with Dr. Edgar Mitchell's Quantrek group of scientists, of international scientists, for 6 years. And we researched zero-point energy, consciousness, and the extraterrestrial presence. During that time, I moved from Phoenix, Arizona, where I had lived for 20 years, to Washington, D.C. So I want to share with you today, maybe during junior high school, you went on a trip to Washington, D.C., and maybe some of you haven't been back for a long time. Well, D.C. has changed. So I'm going to share a brief aerial view with you today. It's our first map. My map of Washington, D.C., that I'm going to show you today was created from 4 years of living there in a place that I felt was both foreign as well as a place that I needed to be. I've met so many wonderful people, so many young people that moved there really wanting to make a difference and doing remarkable things while they're there. But in the big picture, often I didn't like what I saw. But I sucked up my courage, I accepted it as real, I questioned it, but I didn't deny it or fantasize about it like it was really something else. Washington, D.C. is formed in a diamond, and it was an esoteric, swampy creation formed by secret societies, religious people, and wealthy men who, quite frankly, enslaved other people. And unfortunately, that is still our current reality, as our politicians are still enslaving people with treaties like the Trans-Pacific Partnership that are enslaving children who work, young people that are sold into sexual slavery. So the snake of the Potomac River slithers through Washington, D.C. to awaken its power, and I'm just going to kind of touch on a couple power places. Money is the primary power of Washington, D.C., as if we all didn't know that. Money is the currency. The IMF, the World Bank, the Department of the Treasury, they all infuse the planet with cash on one hand and debts on the other. And the lobbyists on K Street infuse politics with corporate cash or debt. Information is power in D.C. And many people in D.C., regardless of whose name is hanging from the badge or the lanyard around their neck, may have some intelligence tie. This was something that was really quite surprising to me. I found that when I met people and they said they worked for State Department, the fact was, quite frankly, and quite possibly, they worked for the CIA. And then I found out that the same thing was going on for journalists and politicians and religious people and university professors. Not all of them, but many of them were being paid by intelligence organizations. So I learned really quickly, if you see a name badge, don't trust the company that's on the name badge. I recently met a person who had worked for 30 years at DOD. I looked up DOD, how many people work there. 3 million people work at DOD, the Department of Defense. She awakened me to the state of intelligence in DC. According to her, and this was a recent conversation, everything is penetrated. They know, other countries know everything that we're doing, and yet we show up at work every day, we do our work, and we go along. But we know that everything is penetrated, so quite frankly, so much for information. Religion also holds power, and as you know from my introduction, I have a deep religious background. There are churches and temples everywhere in DC, and the Roman Catholic Church is the most prominent. The land that became Washington, D.C. was owned by 2 men, Mr. Carroll and Mr. Pope. Mass Avenue, or Massachusetts Avenue, but everybody calls it Mass Avenue, as in Eucharist, or communion, Mass, is the main axis. Mass Ave houses many foreign embassies and UN organizations. There are 3 points of influence in the Roman Catholic Church in Washington, D.C. Georgetown, the Jesuit University, alma mater of John Podesta, Bill Clinton, and home of the very well-funded and influential Hillary Clinton's Institute for Women. Second is the campus of Catholic University and the Basilica. Third is the Papal Nuncio. And I've actually met some people that work at the Papal Nuncio, lovely, lovely individuals. The Papal Nuncio is kind of like the Vatican's embassy. So, as I was preparing this talk, I thought, isn't it interesting how today we're still fighting the same crusade in the Holy Land against the Muslim infidels that we've been fighting for a long time. So I looked up and I thought, well, I wonder when the first crusade was. When was the first papal crusade? It was 1032. We've been fighting that fight, folks, for 1,000 years. All around the same land and the same issues. We talk about war in space going on forever. We got it right here on this planet. Another religious presence is the National Cathedral. Maybe if you see prominent people who die, they have their funerals at the National Cathedral. It's really quite spectacular. And it's crumbling. They're $100 billion in debt with dwindling staff. On the outskirts of DC is the Mormon Church, the Mormon Cathedral. The Mormons, or so I've heard, are one of the major recruits of the CIA and many intelligent bodies. War holds power. Washington, D.C. duplicates Moscow and London and many world capitals where monuments glorifying wars are everywhere. This is the really quite stunning Korean War Memorial. You really feel like you're walking through a battlefield when you're touring it, and you can get in and walk among the statues. In Washington, D.C., secret society stars and constellations hide in plain sight, but tourists rarely see them, nor do the politicos who walk their formations back and forth to work. Before we leave DC, I have to drop one little other tidbit. Let's pretend that you're standing at Reagan Airport in Virginia, and we're looking across the Potomac River. If you've ever flown into DC, you know the place I'm talking about. You're going to see a landscape filled with building cranes. These cranes are building the campus of the Department of Homeland Security. It's a beginning budget of $4.1 billion, to consolidate the 60 scattered offices that live across DC. It's being built on a colonial site called St. Elizabeth. St. Elizabeth housed, the irony of this is great, the first federally funded insane asylum in the nation. The site was also, St. Elizabeth was also the site of a lot of mind control experiments back in the 50s. So the Department of Homeland Security is so vast since 9/11. It just boggles your mind. Actually, this building project that is being undertaken in Washington, D.C. is the biggest building project since the Pentagon. And raise your hand if you knew anything about it. Did anybody know about it? You're probably not going to know about it until it's all done and everybody shows up for the big dedication. But now you know. If you notice, I didn't mention Congress, or the Capitol, or the White House, because honestly, once you live in D.C., you get the message that those folks just come and go. The real power lies in the roots of Washington, D.C. Money, war, information, and religion. You can identify the roots of Washington, D.C. by its branches. So really quickly, fasten your seatbelts. We're going to go on a very quick trip west to east around the outer belt of Washington, D.C. And I think some of this information is the most stunning information. First, we're going to go to the Pentagon Roslyn branches, where all the many defense contractors live in Crystal City, all spread beneath the towering replica of the Lighthouse of Alexandria, where the Masonic Brethren still gather to celebrate their rituals. Next, we're going to travel north into the branches of a little tiny area called Tyson's Corner. Today it's called Tyson's. They rebranded it. It is a world technology corridor. Tyson's Corner is the computer vortex that powers the world's internet, not the Silicon Valley, Northern Virginia. This was really quite a surprise to me. So the internet is powered and controlled through Northern Virginia. This area of Tyson's Corner in Northern Virginia also houses technology, defense contractors, banks, media, and as you drive through it, you come to these buildings where there's no signage. All there are these high-tech fences surrounding them. And then you go home and Google the address, and guess what? It's an intelligence installation. Many countries figured out that they needed to come to Washington, D.C. to get a piece of the action, a part of the money. And so they have housing in these buildings in Northern Virginia, and their personnel fly back and forth home out of nonstop flights at Dulles Airport, which is just up the street. Next, we're going to veer east to the Bethesda Naval Hospital, or NIH. Bethesda anchors one of the world's primary pharmaceutical technology corridors. Genome projects live here, hospitalized wounded warriors live here, and research for super soldiers live here. This corridor ends aptly at a place called Fort Detrick, where much of our bioterrorism warfare is housed. If you live in Fort Detrick, don't drink the water. Now we're going to veer further east to the green belt of Maryland, and how pastoral that sounds. But it's actually the home of massive intelligence campuses spread across lush lawns behind high-tech fences. NSA, NASA, Fort Meade, and perhaps the remnants of MK Ultra and mind control are stored here. Combine these maps with major universities, countless military installations, and you have the magical world of Disney. I mean, DC. It took me a while but I finally realized that Washington, D.C. is creating our Tomorrowland. Question: do we want to live in this Tomorrowland? When I see these patterns and maps, I ask myself, what am I perceiving and experiencing? Where am I in all of this? And how am I participating? Keep all of these contexts in mind as we move to our next map. The Map of Ufology. This is our map of UFOs, exopolitics, ETs, and ET experiencers. Like the map of Washington, D.C., my map view has evolved, but over a much longer time frame. I have great admiration for all the pioneers of our field, for the challenging and daring work that they show up and do every day. Yet often, like the map of Washington, D.C., I didn't like what I saw. But I sucked up my courage, I looked at it, I accepted it as real. I still question it frequently, but I don't deny what I see. I believe that our map of ufology was masterminded 70 years ago by government, military, religion, and intelligence. These are the sources of ufology, the primary sources of ufology. Not that there haven't been very widely known few ET experiencer stories scattered through that ufology. But what I think what happened to us was with the military, government, intelligence, and religious sources, without knowing it, in ufology, we became our sources. Do you understand what I mean when I say we became our sources? This is how consciousness works. You keep researching the same sources, talking to the same people and experts, and after a while, you become them. You see the world through their eyes, through their perspective. I had to ask myself, is this what happened to us in ufology and exopolitics? Have we become the government, military, intelligence, and religion that we so feverishly have researched for clues to UFOs and ETs? That's my question. Here's another quick aerial view of ufology, so fasten your seatbelts again, because this is going to be quick. Let's do a flyover of ufology and look at the accumulation of UFO history that is archived, hidden, and sometimes leaked by governments or religions. From Kenneth Arnold to Roswell, to the Twining memo, to the Blue Book mutations, to the Phoenix Lights, SETI, and MUFON investigations, the field of ufology has primarily, not completely, but primarily been sourced in government, military, and intelligence information. Like the center spokes of Washington, D.C., government, military, and intelligence are the roots of ufology. Question: have we become our sources? As my grandfather used to say, if you keep digging in the same hole, you're going to pull up the same dirt. So, wisely, in time, we switched from UFOs to the Rockefeller Initiative and exopolitics. At this place on our map, we tried to be politically correct. We tried to be politically relevant. We tried to convince the political powers that we have a situation of national security that must be addressed. Well, by their response, the Congress and the President apparently think they have things well under control without us. A couple years ago, I attended a small dinner party in Washington, D.C. A man seated to my left was high up in a major intelligence agency. He was bemoaning the fact of how all of their information was being hacked and broken into. And very quietly, I just said, "That's a really interesting comment you made." I said, "I thought, and maybe I'm wrong, but I thought your agency had maybe first or second generation quantum computers in its upper reaches, and you can't hack a quantum computer." And my husband sitting across the table goes, "Rebecca, she doesn't know what she's talking about." And the man looked over at my husband and said, "Yes, she does, and she's right." So I decided, okay, here's your chance. Walk through the door. So I nicely leaned over to him in my best dinner party etiquette and said, "I'm right about something else too." And he said, "Really? What's that?" I said, "I'm right that the intelligence agencies control all the UFO information and the timing of disclosure." And he nodded his head and said to me, "You're right about that too." Slowly, ever so slowly, I began to see beneath the surface of our ufology exopolitics map. Invisible situations began to be visible. I began to see how different groups began to claim the ET experience. Not only the government. I began to see how these groups were becoming the public spokesperson for ET experience, filtering the information. Gradually, little by little, these groups were claiming our knowledge, our ET experience. And we were becoming disenfranchised and pushed to the borders. So let's look at some of these groups that were claiming ET information. First, mind control groups claim ET. Beneath the map of ufology and exopolitics, mind control programs emerged. If you study consciousness, sooner or later you're going to study mind control. These mind control programs are rooted in very ancient schools, probably Egyptian, Babylonian schools. The information was then taken over by secret societies, moved into agencies, intelligence agencies, and then into professors at major universities until today we have technology dominating the old pursuit of controlling humans by controlling our minds. 20th century major universities in particular had deep, deep ties and collusion with the CIA and intelligence programs. Researchers such as a man named Price, who you might want to Google, are only now just beginning to ferret out and uncover the extent of the university infiltration of mind control programs. For example, this was really difficult for me, but John Mack, who I love and admire, was funded by Lawrence Rockefeller. And the Rockefellers were very influential in the Tavistock Institute in London and numerous major mind control programs. Here is a quote from a man named Henry Murray. He was the founder of the Boston Psychoanalytic Institute, where John graduated. Murray was also head of Harvard's psychology clinic. Murray was also affiliated with CIA and MK Ultra. Here is Henry Murray's view of us. It's from a lecture he gave in 1962 and was published in the Journal of Social Issues. And Henry Murray says, "Here is where our psychology comes in with the bulk of its theories, images of man, obviously in league with the satanic spirit. Man is a computer, an animal, an infant. His destiny is completely determined by genes, instincts, accidents, early conditioning, reinforcement, cultural and social forces." This quote made me sick. It made me angry, and it made me grow up. I had to deal with what I had read. I had to deal with what I was beginning to see and what I was learning, and not live in a fantasy that things were not the way I was seeing them. Mind control is a linchpin of exopolitics and ufology. It is and exoconsciousness. It is difficult to look at, much less admit, but it was part of John Mack's world, and it is part of our world. Mind control is part of our music culture, our entertainment culture, our sex culture, our drug culture, our marriage and family culture. Mind control via the CIA programs was involved in major movements that probably everyone in this room has participated in. Course on Miracles, Esalen, Ra, even the Dalai Lama and his brother had CIA contacts and ties. We as a UFO, ufology, exopolitics, exoconscious community are not alone in this. The influence on mind control is humbling and, quite frankly, at times embarrassing. But it's our minds, and we must maturely go into this information of how we were manipulated. Second, Star Wars claims E.T. The second situation beneath the surface of ufology map only recently emerged. The secret space programs and the corporatized science have taken over Star Wars claims to ETs. As the all too familiar government, military, intelligence whistleblowers tell us their phantasmical stories, we are on the edge of our seats. A whistleblower is better than Hollywood. But the fact is, most of us are still trying to figure out if we ever went to the moon. Most of us are still trying to ferret out what NASA's colorized images of space mean to all of us. I spent a morning and afternoon with Mario Livio, who's an astrophysicist at Hubble Space Telescope. At one point during our day, he stopped in front of a lone person sitting at a computer terminal. Mario casually looked over at me and went, "He's colorizing our feeds from space." Here's what I think. I think there may be aspects of truth in the military whistleblowers, but they are also government magicians spinning a story, colorizing what we call reality. Third, material science claims ET. For years, I've had a Google alert for extraterrestrials. Google sends you an email when extraterrestrials is mentioned, and you can click through all the articles and read them. In the past several years, I have witnessed an absolute change in my Google alerts. In the past, extraterrestrial Google alerts used to concern UFO sightings or people who had ET contact. And now all the Google alerts come from the astrophysicist, the astrobiologist, the cosmologist. And the context of all the stories is ET doesn't exist until we find them. This drives an experiencer like me crazy. Fourth, as Danny Sheehan talked about today, the Vatican is now claiming ET. Today, religion is playing a major, massive role in disclosure. The papal entourage processing down the byways of ufology, Vatican astronomers discussing planets where ET might reside, theologizing if it is appropriate to baptize ET with holy water. I have seen this unfolding for some time. During last year's two-day Library of Congress symposium called Preparing for Discovery of ET, I started an email conversation with the man who was running the symposium for the Library of Congress. After the symposium, I made note of how it was covered in the press. Almost every major article written about the Library of Congress gathering was contextualized in the Vatican astronomer or whether or not we were going to baptize ET. I knew then we had a done deal. The Vatican and the Pope were going to be our next phase of ufology, our next filter for ET experience. Question, ET experiencers. Do we want to live in these maps, only these maps of ufology and exopolitics? Do we want to stand by and let science and the Vatican and military whistleblowers and mind controllers claim our ET experience? Once again, what am I perceiving and experiencing? Where am I in all of this, and how am I participating? Question, is there another map available? Yes, the map of exoconsciousness. In this map, we will outline the emerging context of ET experiencers, the quiet individuals, and the small communities. We will begin to build our context, our map as ET experiencers. First, we ET experiencers, we exoconscious, live in the field of consciousness. We are living today in what I call the exoconscious perfect storm. That means that there are two major storm fronts emerging and merging together that is going to create a new wave of information coming forth and cresting over all of us. I call those two fronts consciousness science and ET experiencers. I don't know if you thought about this or not, but this is the first time in known human history that we have the ability to test, to theorize, and to measure consciousness as a field, not just a brain phenomenon. This means that we as ET experiencers have not only our personal knowledge of contact and what happened and what was communicated to us, but that consciousness science is validating us. There are two schools of consciousness, brain science and neurology, and consciousness science via cosmic consciousness. Really quickly, just an overview. This all really began with the Human Genome Project, which was mapping our gene sequences, started in 1984, completed in 2003. Today, it continues under new names. The assumption of the Genome Project was that as parents, we passed faulty genes to our children, which caused them to get sick. Well, after over 700 genome publications and $100 billion, genetics has found not even a fraction of the genetic base for disease. And yet we tout it as this wondrous success. Next, we have the decade of the brain. This was the Bush Brain Initiative. This was the first push to identify consciousness with the brain. In comparison to the Human Genome Project, the Bush Brain Initiative was a spectacular flop. In 2013, we had the big buildup of the Obama Brain Initiative, which we hear about today. This is the brain activity map that is mapping all the cells in the brain as well as all the connection of those cells. And we read all the headlines connected to this brain mapping of all the advances of artificial intelligence. So let's look at the difference between brain science, which is really artificial intelligence, and consciousness science. According to brain science, the neural networks of the brain are the center of consciousness as an information processor. The brain produces consciousness. So we see ourselves as a computer or as a machine. In brain science logic, if you build a BMW, is it conscious that it is driving? Much less. Is it conscious that it is the ultimate driving machine among all other cars? In brain science, consciousness is an emergent property of the brain, like wetness is an emergent property of water. Build a brain or a computer model, and you have consciousness. In comparison, according to consciousness science, the mind has always existed. As Adam was talking about today, consciousness is the foundation of everything. It is a field, not a physical organ. They cite examples of humans with limited brain matter who function just fine with only half a brain, just like you and I function with a whole brain. Consciousness to science is developing, as Adam talked about, quantum experiments to discuss, measure, and quantify this consciousness field. And in some respects, quite frankly, brain science is conceding to consciousness science and saying, okay, consciousness is probably a fundamental property of the universe, like matter, energy, space, and time. These are some of the scientists that I work with, that I communicate with on email blogs. Sometimes I Skype with them. These are the people I believe that are going to be joining with us as ET experiencers. If I was to name one amazingly exciting thing that is happening for us as ET experiencers, and I've been an ET experiencer since childhood, I would say that it's us working with these consciousness scientists, not for them to claim the information we give them, but to work together to validate and measure and empower what we're experiencing. So there's David Chalmers, of course, who launched the whole easy problem of consciousness, how the brain receives information, categorizes, focuses, reacts to stimuli, and then David said, but slow down that train because we have this massive, hard problem of consciousness. How do we feel? How do we value things? How do we know that we're not the ultimate human machine? Then there's Rupert Sheldrake and the morphic field that started at Harvard. He documents his studies from Harvard in the 1920s when they ran these rats through these mazes, these water labyrinth mazes, and after 10 years, these rats got really good at running these mazes. So they took all the documentation and shut down the program. Many years later, and different rats of genetic origin were given the same experiments in Australia and in Scotland. And guess what? The next experiments of rats in Scotland and in Australia picked up where the other rats left off. So Sheldrake looks at that and says, this is about a morphic field of consciousness. This isn't about passing down genes or passing down information through your genetic code. This is about the field of consciousness. Then there's Stuart Penrose and Stuart Hameroff and Penrose. Penrose is an English mathematician, the geometry of space, a brilliant mathematician, and Hameroff is an anesthesiologist. Hameroff now is looking at the microtubules of the brain. He's doing really amazing things with the field of consciousness and how our brain receives that field of consciousness. And he's finding out that if you use an ultrasound, like when you're pregnant, you get an ultrasound. If you put an ultrasound in a person's brain, it can stabilize those microtubules. Some of the other people we just mentioned are Rita Pizzi. She's in Italy working. Deepak Chopra, of course, Dean Radin, who works with intentionality, Larissa Charan, and my good friend Carla Gadsmith, who is doing work in telepathy. Second, we exoconscious have psychic intelligence. We have highly developed psychic intelligence. We are naturally psychic. Howard Gardner is a Harvard psychologist who founded the concepts of multiple intelligences. He thought the IQ test, standard IQ test, was way too limited, just studying logic, mathematics, linguistics, and so he broadened it out to 8 intelligences. When I looked at the intelligence, the psychic intelligence of ET experiencers, I knew that we had a 9th intelligence. And so I say, to paraphrase how Gardner speaks of intelligences, that psychic intelligence is the ability to solve problems or create products that are valued within one or more cultural settings. Specifically, it is natural human function to be telepathic, to express our psychic intelligence through telepathy. We talk to ET telepathically. Dean Radin came out recently, and I don't know how many of you heard him talk and say, human telepathy is scientifically proven. Human-to-human telepathy is scientifically proven. He looked at the work of 3 Italian scientists who analyzed 30 years of ESP and telepathy experiments and found that the hit rate was so statistically high that there was no doubt that human telepathy existed. Third, we exoconscious develop our spiritual being. We know that within the deep core of our being there is a goodness and a light. Some call it love, kindness, compassion. We feel this core goodness and work with it. We actually work with our spirituality. Carol Jewell, who's here at this conference today, I hope some of you get to meet her, has founded an Institute for Cosmic Interaction. These people, of whom I am a member, we work together from our spiritual being to heal and to communicate. Fourth, we exoconscious move outside the matrix. Why is it important now to move outside the matrix? If you follow the unfolding of Kurzweil, then you realize that we are now in the era of singularity. Computers are creating computers. The internet is a massive conscious entity that all of us interact with every day. But going beyond the data, here's what I see in our future. We have 2 streams of science merging to create a new planetary matrix. First, we have a group called Vicarious. It is a group that is anchored by billionaires Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Peter Thiel, and Jeff Bezos. This vicarious group claims that they will build the artificial consciousness that trumps all the other artificial intelligence. Again, referring to my friend, they can now computerize all the neural networks, but they don't know what consciousness is. So my guess is that they're going to put this artificial intelligence into operation without knowing what consciousness is, and chances are they're going to pull in a consciousness. They're going to pull in a consciousness from the non-local field. Who knows who they're going to pull in? These guys are 21st century magicians. Aleister Crowley's. I don't think they're having all the sex that Aleister Crowley had, but their toys are better. So next we have CERN. I don't know if you realize it or not, but we have over 30 particle accelerators throughout the world. First we had the story that we founded the God particle. Then we had the story that we founded parallel universes. The story is that we are learning how to manipulate gravity on a global level, the high energy physics of manipulating our planet. The name vicarious Its root word is vicar. If you are a vicar, you are the substitute clergy at a church. So obviously, the billionaires, along with the Roman Catholic Church, who is funding CERN and sending their scientists there, believe that they are creating a substitute matrix for us. So we exoconscious humans are now at a crossroads. What are we left if we move away from the root sources and branches that define our nation that I illustrated in the map of Washington, D.C.? What are we left when we move beyond the root sources of ufology, exopolitics, the map of our last 70 years? What are we left with when we see the new technology matrix that's unfolding right before our eyes? We are left with ourselves as ET experiencers. We are exoconscious humans, not technology machines and not computers. We are humans. Exoconscious humans, not singularity hive minds, we are an emerging creative community. And as exoconscious, it is time for us to claim the right to create our own map. Yay. Thank you. As exoconscious humans, we have the right to claim and participate in our own communities. And they may be quiet, and they may be small, but they are our communities. The Institute for Exoconsciousness is a place to create a map as ET experiencers, just one of the many places to create a map. The Institute for Exoconsciousness is a grassroots movement. As exoconscious, we are simply a diverse community of humans who are aware that a part, if not all, of our identity is extraterrestrial. We are powerful because we are not alone. With the assistance of an experiencer in Hong Kong named Stan Ho, we designed a t-shirt. It says, "I am exoconscious" on the front, and on the back it says, "I am exoconscious" in 11 different languages. So if you want a t-shirt, sign up on the tablet at my table, and I'll send you an email, and you can wear the t-shirt and have fun with it. I am exoconscious, but I am not alone. We exoconscious are joined by a mass awakening of communities that is global. We claim, as ET experiencers, one seat at this table of conscious communities. Who occupies the other seats? Who's sitting around this table with us? It's people that probably you are interfacing with all the time. The near-death experiencers, the healers, the mediums, the psychics, the spiritual practitioners, any group who lives and explores the vast field of consciousness. Together, with these people around this table of consciousness, we are creating a quilt that is awakening consciousness. We have got to get to this table. And our message to these diverse community that sit around this table that we are going to join is, and it comes from Claudine, my friend, what we all ultimately hunger for is no different. For terrestrials or beings from elsewhere, regardless of our differences of appearance or mental wiring, we are all made of the same cosmic substance and essentially manifested from one and the same. So I am so glad you gave me the opportunity to share my maps, to share exoconsciousness, and I hope you enjoyed the chance to maybe differently contextualize your ET experience. If you feel drawn to exoconsciousness or want to talk or brainstorm ideas or get a t-shirt, because that would be fun too. We'll work together. I want to meet you, and I want to welcome you. I know you, and you know me, and that's where we start. Thank you.